This program is brought to you by the Center for a Sustainable Today. Our world is an amazing, complex living organism, and we coexist in a symbiotic relationship. With this great power comes a great responsibility, a responsibility to ensure the future by taking steps to be sustainable today. And now, here is the host of Sustainable Today.
Hello, and welcome to Sustainable Today. I'm Sherry Steller, your host for this hour. If you're among the thousands of people who suffer from hay fever, then you're probably interested in pollen counts. But what about the hard-working winged creatures that spread that golden dust, pollinating flowering plants and agricultural products that we depend upon? Pollinators. In the U.S. alone, the economic value of the pollination services provided by native insects, mostly bees, is estimated at $3 billion per year. What is the current status of pollinators? How fragile is the connection between plants and pollinators? And what can we do to help? We'll be exploring these questions this hour with the help of three guest experts. Dr. Ramesh Sagili, Assistant Professor and Senior Researcher at Oregon State University's Department of Horticulture. Mace Vaughn, Pollinator Program Director, Entomologist, Educator at the Xerces Society. And Glen Andresen, local area beekeeper and instructor and master gardener and educator. So we were having a lively conversation before the show started about pollinators. You all know each other. So let's go back to 2006. Most people have heard about they may not know this CCD in scientific terms, but most people have heard about the colony collapses. Dr. Sagili, could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, colony collapse disorder, what we go with CCD, was a phenomena that was reported in 2006 fall, basically. So when the surveys were done in 2007 spring, that means close to March. So the colonies total that were lost in the United States were reported to be 36%, close to that. And then from there on, we have been seeing this pattern for last couple of years. And last spring, in April, when the USDA and Apiary Inspectors of America, they did another survey, the losses were put to 29%. So we were a little encouraged that the losses are going down. But this year again, in this April, when the survey was done, the losses are up again to 34%.
Mm-hmm. And your research centers on primarily bees, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because all three of our guests are really going to be focusing on bees, although other pollinators, of course, include bats, hummingbirds.
Butterflies, beetles, flies, wasps, sorts of different things.
Yeah.
Yeah, honeybees are native bees are very important, but honeybees, we have been reliant on honeybees so long because of the cropping pattern that has changed in the last several years, and we are reliant on monocropping. Like you go to California, you have almond orchards, millions of acres there, and you need approximately like 1.5 million hives to pollinate the almond over there. So honeybees are doing a big job, but native pollinators are equally important because without native pollinators, it's a problem as well because they're kind of an insurance when honeybees are not around. So we are totally reliant these days on honeybees.
Well, it's interesting. The honeybee losses have resulted in, from a grower's perspective, honeybees are getting more and more expensive. For years with the almond orchards, more than half of the honeybees in the U.S. need to be in California for the almond bloom. And so that price of a hive rental went from $50 5 or 6 years ago up to $150 to $175 today.
Yeah.
And so I thought this was only going to be an almond problem for many years, but in talking with cranberry growers in the East and apple growers in the East and cherry growers in Oregon, their prices have all doubled over the last couple of years, where they were paying $30, $35 a hive, and now they're paying between $50 and $75 depending on where they are and what it takes. And so there's been, from our work at the Xerces Society is focused on how do we create a habitat and a landscape that can support these honeybees as well as these native bees as an insurance policy. And it's been interesting, the number of growers who are all of a sudden taking this quite seriously and trying to figure out, well, how do they ensure that they're getting sort of the whole suite of pollinators available, having those available for their crop pollination. So it's interesting, they're looking at their honeybees and honeybee hive health, and they're looking at, well, how do we create a landscape that brings in more of our wild bees as well?
This may sound like a dumb question, but at what point did agriculture start relying so heavily on commercial pollination?
No, it's a good question.
Yeah,
Okay.
maybe I can say last 2 decades we have been reliant. Yeah, because almond is not native to North America. Almonds are grown in Middle East, maybe Turkey, and those areas. And we have bought that crop. And right now, today, California is the largest producer of almonds in the world. Just one California state alone. So, and that needs 1.5 million hives. So we are totally reliant. So the cropping pattern has changed in all these last 2 decades, basically.
Yeah, and I think I saw a paper on your organization's website that was talking about 4 species of bumblebees, right? The bombas, and that it's even broader than declines in their populations alone. Can you explain that?
Well, we've got these losses, let's say in the case of honeybees, from colony collapse disorder, the Varroa mite, diseases in the honeybees, all these have led to these 30+% losses every year. But we also have a whole suite of native species, particularly some of our bumblebees that were incredibly common in the mid-1990s. In the West here, in Oregon, we had the western bumblebee, and it was being commercially reared for greenhouse and open field pollination, and those commercial rearing facilities, they collapsed. Basically, the labs that were rearing these bees no longer, like the whole rearing operation fell apart, and at that same time, these very common bumblebees started declining all across the country. So the western bumblebee here, the rusty patch bumblebee in the east, the yellow banded bumblebee in the east, they're all very closely related. And so the concern there is that some sort of a disease got into these commercial rearing facilities and then has been spread all across the United States. So we've got, facing honeybees, we've got diseases and pests. Facing our native species, we've got diseases and possibly pests that we're spreading around. And so one of our goals is to try to determine, working with scientists all across the country, what's causing the decline in these bumblebees so we can begin to arrest that decline. But then how do we bring habitat back into these different landscapes, whether they're cities or farms, to be able to support all these bees and make them much more resilient to things like disease or even pesticide use?